Think you're a good liar? A real master of deception? Think again. To an FBI agent with the right training, you're less Hannibal Lecter and more Pinocchio. So what exactly does an interrogator look for? And can you turn these methods to your own advantage? On today's episode of the Infographics Show, we're revealing how the FBI spots liars. To some people, FBI agent Steve Van Apren is known as the human lie detector, which, let's be honest, probably makes him unbearable at parties. He's made a living spotting the tiny tells that keep showing up in people who aren't telling the truth. It borders on pseudoscience, as much art as science, shaped by Van Apren's finely tuned instincts. Still, his guide to sniffing out fakes and frauds offers plenty of interesting and surprisingly useful tricks that you can use in everyday conversations. Let's start with the stuff lies are made of: words. The words a person chooses and the way they say them can tell you a lot. According to Van Apren, language is one of the biggest giveaways when it comes to spotting the truth. One little feature of grammar to pay close attention to is pronouns. In Van Apren's words, "I remember working on a case and a boy went missing. When the parent was spoken to, he kept referring to his son as that boy rather than his name or my boy, my son." To Van Apren, that is a red flag. Truthful people take ownership. When people lie, they create distance. Let's say you got someone a gift last Christmas, and a month later you spot a remarkably similar one on a shelf at the local thrift store. You decide to get a little passive-aggressive and investigate, casually asking your friend about the gift you got them. If Van Apren's logic follows, if they use more possessive pronouns, like saying my gift instead of the more impersonal the gift, they're probably not hiding anything, though we don't actually recommend trying this. If you keep grilling your friends, you might not have anyone left to give gifts to. Weird language choices are often a dead giveaway that skullduggery is afoot. And it's not just Van Apren that believes this. Just ask Gabrielle Stewart, a retired insurance investigator who now works as a professional fraud consultant. She said, "We use completely different language when we're telling lies." A real famous example is President Nixon. He was asked straight out, "Did you know about Watergate?" And his answer was, "The president would do no such thing." Notice how the response doesn't actually fit the question? It's a common way of lying without lying, subconsciously altering the question to a less direct, more vague one that you wished you were asked. Of course, it's never just the things people say, it's often how they say it. In the lie detecting biz, they call these paralinguistic features, and they're a potential goldmine of communicative data that might just catch the smoke of a liar's flaming pants. One of the big ones is inflection and tone of voice. Throughout his career, Van Apren has noticed that liars have a tendency to shift their pitch or intonation at the end of sentences. It can feel a little awkward or unnatural. People who say things like, "I didn't do that," or "That's not me," those are the kind of vocal features that start ringing alarm bells. Another thing to watch out for is filler words, your ums, ahs, and likes. Van Apren believes that these little nervous tics that indicate a hesitancy in speech could be a sign that they're making the story up as they go, buying themselves time to invent extra details that make the lie sound more convincing. Well, either that or they're just a valley girl. They just kind of talk like that, you know? An important thing to remember about all this is that many of the signs that indicate a liar in Van Apren's view are also just signs of nervousness, and you'd really need ice in your veins to not feel at least a little nervous while being interrogated by an FBI agent, even if you are completely truthful. If you're the kind of person who feels nervous ordering pizza over the phone, no shade, we're the same, consider how freaked out you might be feeling in Steve Van Apren's interrogation room. That is gonna affect the way you talk. But it's not just the way you talk that FBI agents focus on. We can't forget about the importance of body language. According to Van Apren, one of the classic pieces of liar body language is the hand-face block. When you're in class and Stevie insists that his uncle really does work at PlayStation, that's why he gets to play all the new games before they're out, pay attention. You might notice he's covering his mouth, rubbing his neck, or lightly touching his ear or eye. All of these might mean that he is lying about his uncle's PlayStation gig, and maybe even his supermodel girlfriend who you wouldn't know because she lives in Canada. This is what Van Apren calls blocking behavior, a defensive posture that indicates you might have something to hide. In his own words, behavioral scientists believe that when a person consciously decides they're going to lie, they feel uncomfortable. The subconscious effort is to use a hand-to-face block to literally block those false words from coming out of their mouth. Another reason you might see actions like this, according to another so-called body language expert, ex-FBI agent Joe Navarro, is that they are self-soothing behaviors. rituals that keep you calm during a stressful moment. Covering your face, rebuttoning a shirt that's already buttoned, fiddling with your car keys, or some other random object, it could all be signs that a person is lying or they just have undiagnosed ADHD. The face is a fascinating body part because it's often communicating so much whether the person in possession of said face knows it or not. Van Apren believes that the face is where you'll most often read a lie in someone trying to pull the wool over your eyes, especially a smile. When you know what to look for, there is nothing more obvious than a fake smile. But how do you spot one? Once again, Van Apren has the answer. Usually a false smile occurs from the nose down, and it's just the corner of the lips being pulled up toward the corner of the eyes. A real smile engages two major muscle groups. There will also be crinkling around the edges of the eyes, but that is Botox dependent. Another classic tell in this same family is a smile not reaching the eyes, meaning it only uses the muscles in the lower half of the face. In some people, that can indicate a lack of sincerity. Your inability to smize will not only stop a person from lying effectively in an interrogation scenario, it will also, perhaps even more tragically, preclude you from becoming America's next top model. Though we feel the need to add it's dependent on a number of other things too. People with neurodivergencies like autism might smile a little differently, and the smile is also a surprisingly culturally loaded symbol too. A study from the National Library of Medicine on smiles found that in cultures with high markers of corruption, smiling people are just generally seen as less trustworthy. Context always matters. But let's stay on the face for a second. They say that the eyes are the window to the soul. But maybe a liar was just saying that to distract us from the eyelids, where Steve Van Apren says the true deceptions are hidden. After lying, you're liable to start blinking with increasing frequency, perhaps because you're nervous about getting found out. Though admittedly, this can be a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy, because they might be reacting to you staring very intensely at their eyelids every time you suspect they're lying. However, you should never let your focus on the face distract you from the story that the rest of the body is telling you. Joe Navarro, the self-styled body language expert that we were telling you about earlier, also believes that the thumbs hide an important piece of information. In his words, lowering the thumbs or even hiding the thumbs communicates insecurities or a lack of commitment. Again, it tells us there is an issue. We want to see the thumbs up when someone is emphasizing, or even straight-up thumbs further apart. The more territorial, the more emphatic and thus more accurate. We give that advice 2 thumbs hidden behind our back. Are they up or are they down? Who knows? One of the FBI's most effective techniques for spotting a liar is to watch for conflicts between what a person says and what their body reveals. This dips into some Jungian subconscious mumbo-jumbo, but bear with us. If someone says no while nodding their head, you're watching their conscious and subconscious minds get their wires crossed. Former FBI hostage negotiator Chris Voss swears by this one. In his words, incongruence between the words and nonverbal signs will show when your counterpart is lying or uncomfortable with the deal. Again, we cannot stress enough how important context is in all these cases. Just ask Brian D. Fitch, a professor of criminal justice at California State University, who has written on this very matter in educational material for the FBI. In his own words, one of the most common misconceptions is the belief in universal signs of deception, consistent, reliable indicators that a person is lying. There are some signs that appear more frequently among liars. However, there has been no universal sign of lying identified. This is because not all liars demonstrate the same behaviors. Even official literature on these matters can make you feel a little insane when you get into it. For example, the American Psychological Association makes a point about liars of omission, how you can often spot a faker by someone being sparse in their details that they provide. Then there's a study from Harvard Business School that says liars are often verbose. They say too much in order to stretch the truth. So saying too much and too little could mean you're a liar. It starts to feel like Goldilocks is the one truthful person who ever lived, and she is a made-up fairy tale character. However, something that you may find a little more interesting are more active ways to throw liars off of their game rather than just waiting for them to slip up. For that, we need to bring yet another ex-FBI specialist into our fold, Lorraine Coy, who spent 24 years working in counterintelligence for the FBI. She learned a thing or two about rattling deceivers with more active approaches than some of her predecessors. One piece of advice she gives is to throw in strange or unexpected questions. Most liars aren't master improvisers. They tend to plan and mentally script their answers in advance, trying to keep their story straight and avoid slipping up. But asking really left-field questions like their last vacation or what they think of their job might throw off their mental script. Their lies might become a little more shaky and obvious to spot in comparison. You could also perform a variation on this technique by making the suspected liar tell their story backwards. They've likely put all their energy into imagining the story the conventional way. But while you could eventually figure out how to tell a real story in reverse, a fake story is much more likely to collapse when not told in the context in which it was intended. And a very simple but ruinously effective method is to ask a huge number of follow-up questions. While there are obviously limits to anyone's recollection of a real event, those recollections are even more limited for something that didn't actually happen. The only details are the ones that the liar personally conceived. So if you keep pushing for them to expand on different points, give more detail, or ask for clarifications, a fake story is much more likely to collapse under that kind of scrutiny. Okay, we're deep enough into this that all the cops have logged off. Let's flip the script for a second and lean into the dark arts a little bit. Knowing all this, if you're an aspiring deceiver, what are ways that you can lie more convincingly? Just as there are ways to spot a lie, there are a number of techniques to punch up your lies. Ways to help you pull the wool over the eyes of your friends, loved ones, and work colleagues. We just don't recommend you lie to any law enforcement officers because if you get caught, you're gonna be in a whole mess of trouble. But with that disclaimer out of the way, what are the methods to becoming an ace liar? We'll start with the classic, the appeal to embarrassment. Humans are social creatures, and one of our absolute social kryptonites is awkwardness. We'll chew off our own leg like a metaphorical trapped coyote to avoid being trapped in an awkward situation. So, a great way to make your lie more plausible and shut down further investigation into said lie is to overshare some information that is uncomfortable, gross, or embarrassing. Let's say you decided to knock back some brewskis on a work night, and the next morning your head feels like a Trojan horse full of angry Greek soldiers. You might want to come to work a little late and just sleep off the worst of the hangover. So when you roll up into the office a few hours late and say, "Sorry," looking like death, your supervisor is gonna have questions. This is a perfect time to try out this technique. Tell them you had the runs, and it'll put a bullet in the head of any follow-up question. Your boss doesn't want the details of your porcelain throne misery, and that's what makes the lie work. After all, who would lie about something that embarrassing? Social status is important to us as humans, so being candid about an embarrassing experience will generally make a lie more plausible. It doesn't fit into the map of how most people would want to be perceived if they had the choice. But like any powerful magic, there's a cost. Just make sure the embarrassment is worth the severity of the truth you're covering up. Or you've told your boss about your pooping habits for nothing. One of the other classic and true pieces of lying advice is confidence. You want to project a sense of ease and control, the exact opposite of the nervous, fidgety liar that all those FBI agents are looking for. Admittedly, if you fuse these techniques and you seem a little too confident while confiding in people about your abnormal pooping habits, you might just seem like a pervert. And that's probably a reputation you want to avoid getting saddled with, for personal reasons too. And this next technique is thankfully a lot less gross. It comes to us from the world of marketing. It's called effective frequency. It's a technique you've seen applied in countless commercials where instructions and slogans are repeated again and again and again. That's because the more you hear one thing, the more your brain processes the concept, and the more true it feels even if it isn't. According to Lisa Fazio, a psychology professor at Vanderbilt University, each time it takes fewer resources to understand. That ease of processing gives it the weight of a gut feeling. Like hearing that vitamin C from fruits and oranges prevents you from getting colds. You probably have heard it a million times as a kid, even though it's actually not true. But you believed it, didn't you? Psychologists have another name for this, the illusory truth effect. So when you lie, it's a smart choice to keep repeating the part of the lie you want your victim to internalize. It really works. It really works. It really works. However, if you're worried about coming across like a greasy used car salesman, sometimes the opposite can be equally effective. If someone asks you a question, just answer the question straight up, even if you're lying. Don't bury it in justifications and supplemental details, because in a person's mind, the truth is self-evident. They don't need to go out of their way to justify or bolster the truth. If it feels like you're reaching too hard to do that, people will smell a rat. As the great Mies van der Rohe once said, less is more. Or maybe take the words of Dr. David J. Lieberman, a psychotherapist who helps teach FBI agents to spot liars. On this very subject, he said, A liar is interested in selling you something. They need you to believe them, which means that they typically oversell well past the point where a truthful person would have stopped. There's a tendency to over-explain. So yeah, don't do that. Another concept you should study is how you act when you're telling the truth. In law enforcement circles, this is sometimes called the baseline. They'll ask you questions you'd be a fool to lie about unless you're a murderer laying low. Stuff like your name, your age, where you live. They're not just listening to your words, they're watching how your vibe changes when the questions start to matter. That shift becomes the yardstick for your honesty. So be aware of how you act when you're telling the truth. The tone of your voice, the way you breathe, the gestures you default to, and make sure you don't deviate too much from that when you start stretching the truth. It involves some acting skill. You're essentially playing yourself while not lying. Sounds pretty simple, but it's really anything but. And if you plan on being a habitual liar, one long game technique is to manufacture the reputation that you are a bad liar. Start by occasionally telling meaningless, inconsequential, and inept lies to your future dupes. Every time self-effacingly saying sorry and that you're such a bad liar afterwards. Using the effective frequency technique that we taught you earlier, you can slowly make people believe this about you. It's weaponizing a psychological phenomenon called the toupee fallacy. The fallacy goes, every toupee is ugly and obvious. I can so tell when someone is wearing one. When that is actually not true. It's only true of the times you've noticed. To you, all the convincing toupees have just been hair. And if you build yourself a reputation as a bad liar, people will only ever spot your bad lies and take your good lies at face value. And we actually have some hilarious science to back this up. In a study titled Lie Prevalence, Lie Characteristics, and Strategies of Self-Reported Good Liars, researchers found that people who call themselves good liars are actually more likely to be deceptive than those flagged by a lie detector. To which we say, of course, because if they're being honest about being a good liar, they're a liar. And if they're not honest about being a good liar, they're also a liar. Have we made the world a worse place by sharing all these diabolical techniques? Perhaps, but we've also been secretly on our FBI Riz the whole time. If you remember these techniques, you'll now be able to spot when a much more sophisticated manipulator is lying to you. One who knows and suppresses all the more obvious tells. People re-emphasizing facts again and again. People all too eager to tell you about the time they pooped their pants. People who lay it on just a little too thick that they couldn't lie to save their lives. Or maybe we are just lying to you too. Who can tell, really? Now you know how FBI agents can spot a liar, but that is just scratching the surface of what they really know. Watch 50 real declassified FBI secrets to uncover what the Bureau has been hiding, or click on this video instead.